Okay, so just by way of catching up, we have been talking about the church as family, and you take all of the principles of what it means to be family and you say, we are a family as a church, and so what does that mean for us? How do we act? How do we live? What are some of the things? And the last thing that we talked about was love, obviously. There's love in the family. And so we spent our last class, is this Wednesday, so on Sunday we spent our last class going through the gospel and letters of John to hear what John had to say about love in the family. And I chose John because he has a lot to say about love and the family. And so this was basically, this is not everything, and I would not even call this a good summary, but this is what we came up with on the board on Sunday from our conversation. Love within the family is a command, not a suggestion. That was the very first thing that we read on the very first passage. These things I command you. And so loving one another is not optional. It's not one of those things where we say, I just don't feel it, I'm not feeling it. It's time to figure it out. It's not an option, it's a command. We'll talk about that more. Loving each other is how we love each other in the way that Jesus loved us. We talked about the example that he set. So we talked about sacrificial love, and we do for one another what Jesus has done for us. We talked about identification, and it's identification in both directions. It's how the world will know that we're God's family, that we love one another, and, I should not say and, or it's how we will know that we're Satan's family. It's how you know who your father is. That's family conversation. And these are some of the contrasting words that we came up with. Love opposed to hate. Love in the context of light opposed to darkness. And it's like, which one do you want? Which one is the right way to be? Love, hate, light, dark, righteousness, evil. All of those were on the board. We talked about this contrast, abiding in God in love versus rejecting God. And so that's basically our summary. Did you have anything you wanted to say or add or new comments about love in the family and what it means, and especially from John? Okay. Then what I told you was tonight is going to be, this is the way that I put it last Sunday. Sunday was the data. This is what the Bible says. Tonight is what does it look like and what does it mean? So I did not put a PowerPoint together because I have plenty to say, 4 pages worth of stuff to say if I need to, but I would much rather if we direct the class in this way. So what does it look like? All of these things, loving one another, how Jesus loved us, identification, love, hate, light, dark, righteousness, evil, abiding God versus rejecting God. Did you say, Jessica, do you want to start? Didn't you say that you had something to say in this class about application?
We mentioned Cain murdering Abel and just that dissension there with the family and how murder is so bad. But it got me thinking, we're not going around murdering each other, but it's a very real sense that we can murder each other spiritually. And that, we have a stumbling block in front of someone. We put that stumbling block in front of someone, and then that veers them off the path of where they need to be going to heaven. We've essentially killed their soul in the long run. Am I making sense?
Yes.
And so it's not so physical for us maybe, but spreading lies, spreading rumors, not yanking them off the edge of the cliff when the time needs to be done. We're essentially committing a murder in the long run.
Yeah. Of a higher caliber. Like we would look at what Cain did to Abel and we would say, oh man, that's really bad. But what about not loving your brother that contributes to, I don't want to say forces, but contributes to the loss of that soul? we should react in the same way. Whoa, you just hit your brother in the head with a rock.
We're still guilty.
Yeah,
We still have that guilt that we would carry with us.
yeah, that's a good comment.
I think the hard part, though, is sometimes we may not be the person that does that, but if we're the person that doesn't stop that or doesn't say something when somebody else, we really are just as guilty, right? We didn't
Yeah.
stand up for our brother or kind of say, hey, you're out of line. You're not right.
Yeah.
You fix the situation.
And even in the cooperating together that we talked about 2 classes ago, the examples of cooperation, remember those 3 examples that we looked at in Matthew 18? If your brother sins, go to him in private. And if that doesn't work, take the family. Like, this is a team effort. Let's go see if we can get it resolved. The second example was 1 Corinthians 6 with the lawsuits. And Paul said when there was church that was people suing one another, and he said, isn't there anybody in your church who can help? And then the other example was Philippians chapter 4 with Euodia and Syntyche, and Paul writes and he says to his true companion, help these women. And so to your point, when you see Cain with the rock in his hand about to murder his brother, your job is to say, whoa, let's see if we can.
I think too, I mean, people maybe with the right intention of like, hey, I'm gonna gather some other people to go to this person, but you're also sometimes, you get recruited into what is more of a mob than a helping situation.
Yeah,
And I think you gotta, that's a hard one in that, kind of thinking of situations I found myself in where I just was silent.
yeah,
And didn't say something. And, yeah.
yeah. And that, what you're talking about, I said mine publicly. It follows you around. It's hard to forget not helping and speaking when you should have. Good. Ryan?
I think about that section in the Sermon on the Mount, I think it's the second or third section, where he says, you've heard it commanded blank, but I tell you blank. And it has a lot to do with, murdering of your brother. Well, I say that if you have hatred towards him, or it's not the drastic case of going and taking another man's wife, but how are you looking? And I think the distinguishing factor that Jesus is pulling out is that they were following the law, but not with any sense of love,
Yeah.
out of a blind obligation to do so. And then it makes you look at the whole Old Testament differently. It makes you look at the Ten Commandments differently. Well, cool, I don't steal my neighbor's things because I love him. I don't bow down to other idols because I love God.
Yeah.
I don't go after other people's wives because I love mine.
Right. So I've got a couple passages written down along the way, and I want to keep your comments coming. And if you will forget, I'm going to hit pause on the comments for 1 second. If you're going to forget what you're going to say or what's in your mind, then hurry up and write it down. Get your phone out and write it down, because I don't want you to forget. But what I want to do is hit pause on the comments, because we've got a couple things out there right now that I think we can dive into just a bit. So first of all, 1 Corinthians 8. Would you go there with me, please? Jessica's comment really made me think of this situation. It's the eating meat and setting meat sacrificed to idols before your brother conversation, both in 1 Corinthians 8 and Romans 14. And I know that they're different, but like so many other things that we do in our Bible study, we're looking at principles here, right? So read the text and let's get into the principle. Would somebody please read for us 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and verses 11 through 13. Oh, before you do, since we're talking about family, one of the things that I want you to take away from this quarter in this study is, like, it's everywhere. It's at more places than you would imagine unless you're paying attention to. And so in these verses, pay attention to family language, specifically brother. and see if you can find it. So go ahead, please.
For through your knowledge, he who is weak is ruined, the brother for whose sake Christ died. And so, by sinning against the brethren and wounding their conscience when it is weak, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if food causes my brother to stumble, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause my brother to stumble.
Is that 4?
That was 11 through 13.
No, I mean 4 times he said the word brother.
Oh,
Brother/brethren.
I'm reading, I can't count.
Oh, yeah, I know. That's the reason why I asked you to read. So I didn't. Yeah, 4 times I think. That's what I caught through there, verses 11 through 13. 4 times said the word brother. And Jessica's comment about murdering our brother spiritually by our lack of love or by our actions that demonstrate lack of love is totally opposite to, I mean, that's one extreme. And then the other extreme is the guy who appreciates the family bond that we have in Christianity and says, what can I do to help you? You tell me what I can do to help you, and within the realm of morality, if I can do it for my brother. And seriously, I know that this doesn't apply for everyone, but is this the attitude that you would take towards your wife or your husband or your mom or your dad or your brothers or your sisters, like somebody in your family? We understand sacrifice for the sake of another. We should understand sacrifice for the sake of the other. I don't think you can read these verses in this whole context, 1 Corinthians 8, 9, and 10, and what Paul's saying, and understand what he's saying and why he's saying it without understanding that he deeply loves his Christian family. I will do whatever I need to do for you. And that's Jessica, your comment brought me to the other side of that. Anything you want to say about that one? I mean, I'll tell you the truth. I know that this is a difficult, we probably need to look at the context so that we can have an apples to apples conversation here. But if this were a conversation of me giving up meat because it's a matter of you sinning and not being right with God, it probably would depend on the person for me. I'm just telling you, we have a high bar. This is not easy stuff that we're talking about. That's what I'm getting at.
So, a couple things. One is, while we're sitting here in Bible class on Wednesday night, we all nod and say, yeah, and amen. And it sounds real intuitive. And yet, our society is socializing us differently. And how often do we see the attitude? And it's a shame sometimes, I'll say it this way, in my lifetime I've even seen it in the church, that they come to a discussion that's hard, and the attitude is, hey, I've got my rights. And that's not what I hear Paul saying here. What I hear Paul saying is, just as you indicated, I'm willing to forego my rights if it's going to cause my brother to sin. Earlier, Paul said, when you read it, that it's a rock. I know it's a rock. It's not an idol. It's a rock. So Paul understood that. But it doesn't matter to him. He's willing to forego his rights because he loves his brother. And you said Romans 14th chapter. I think it does teach this principle also. Or Romans 15 and verse 1. Those who are strong bear with the scruples of the weak. And as you said, I think Sunday, that's not just a friendly suggestion. That's a command.
Yeah.
Those who are strong bear with the scruples of the weak. So, again, I think, we all sit around and put our arms around each other and say kumbaya, but this is hard sometimes.
Yeah.
And sometimes if you've been in a situation where you are approaching a brother about something you want them to consider, they get their backs up sometimes and say, that's none of your business, I've got my rights.
Yeah.
And that's why I think we're having this discussion, so we're all kind of prepared to be open to these discussions.
Right. I want this class to be very practical in nature. And so this part of the conversation, I'm still on point 1. Don't murder your brother. Instead, be willing to follow Jesus' example and give for your brother a lot, everything for the sake of your brother. To your point back there, I would like some examples, if you have an example, or a negative example, if we can do it, because my head, I wrote a big section in my notes about this. This conversation is not equal to, this doesn't mean the tail wags the dog. And it doesn't mean that the congregation, as a church family, can only ever extend beyond the weakest link. You know what I'm saying? It's not like we are governed and driven by the weakest person because nobody wants to go beyond that sort of thing. That's not what this is. It's in principle territory. And so what I would love to have is some examples. Can you give me an example of what it looks like to love your brother in this way? Yeah, Becky?
There's that congregation that we visited years ago, where there was a member who thought that using a pitch pipe or like a thing on your phone to set the tone for your song was wrong. And so every song leader in the place used a tuning fork instead, which I don't know what the difference is, but I thought it was really loving of them to be like, okay, you think this is wrong, and so we're all going to do this different thing.
Yeah. See, yeah. And that's where I would like to. I think that would have to be one of those things for me that's like, if you're just being a cantankerous, argumentative, you're not willing to think about it or even budge on the conversation, the tail's not going to wag the dog. I'm not doing that.
Yeah, I don't think that.
But that, I know what you're talking about. And the other thing was, no, this is a real, like this really genuinely, sincerely was this. And all of the brothers said, for your sake. You know, it's like a case by case. It's a good example, I think. Any others examples that you would like to think of? Yeah, Jay?
I have an example that happened here a long, long time ago. There was, we were having a discussion about interest-bearing accounts. Like, should we be able to use the funds that are collected, on Sunday morning? Can that actually accumulate additional interest in the bank? And I think pretty much the majority of the men agreed on it, but there was actually one or two people who weren't sure, I'll say. We actually studied it, and it wasn't like we forced them to believe it, but ultimately they agreed. And once we had that agreement, we decided that we would go ahead and do it. So that actually had a really happy ending. So
Yeah.
and I think we were all willing to kind of take the time to talk about it. And hey, here's the examples. Here's, the parable of the talents. Just looking at some of those different things biblically,
Yeah.
those principles to come to that conclusion. And then it was like, wow, that went really well.
Yes. Yes. That's the example that I have in my. No, that's not the example that I have in mind. But what you said makes me think of the example that I have in my notes, and that is, I think everybody knows this. If you don't know this, on Sunday evenings we do the Lord's Supper different here than you probably will see in other places. And there's a reason why that happens, is if you have a person or more than one person who says, I think that the Lord's Supper is a Sunday morning when the family is here and we all do it together situation, versus a person who says, it's the first day of the week, we can do the Lord's Supper on the first day of the week, and I need to, and so what if I'm working in the morning? And I love the way that this is the way that I came into this congregation. I have not had anything to do with this, but I love it. I love it so much, because where historically one reaction to a question like that would be, fine, I'm leaving. You do it that way, and I'm going to go do it this way. You got a group of people who love each other who say, how can we make it work? What's the thing that we can do so that everybody can find a way to be right with God and make this work? I love that. I love that. It's a world of difference to say, my way or the highway versus what can I do for you? That's the thing that this class is about, that attitude and principle. Anything else you want to say on that point?
Well, I think so. When I was at Purdue, so 25 years ago, we had the same situation. Well, congregation would like people on one side, people on the other side would say, let's kind of talk about it. Let's have a Sunday evening for the next 6 weeks. Let's have more of a Bible study / presentation of pros and cons and stuff like that. But I can remember And I think that's the approach that is kind of stuck with me all these years too. It's like, we can be totally wrong in our approach and right in what we're saying. But if we just run people over or take no account for others potentially not understanding what we do, or guess what? In 20 years, change your mind too. And a lot of things, you may not be as right as you think you are.
I'm jumping around in my notes here, so I'm going to cross some stuff out so that I don't repeat myself. Let me do this. Ryan, that was number 1, your comment. Killing your brother with hate versus what can I do for my brother? And I think let's also say this, just because this is in my head as we go through this. Nobody, yeah, that's right. I was going to say I'm not going to speak for you, but no, I know it's true. Nobody's talking about compromising truth. That's not what this is. This is not compromising truth. This is, I love my brother if I can't. So far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. That's what this is. And so there's that. Number 2, Ryan, you talked about the love that God has talked about. And so Matthew 22. You all will be familiar with this, but I think that if we're going to have a conversation about love, it would probably be a really, really bad idea to skip the passage in the Bible where Jesus says, this is the most important thing for you to know. I mean, he said those words. And so, somebody, would you read this? Matthew 22, verses 34 to 40, please.
But when the Pharisees had heard he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, what is the great commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love your Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments depend all the law and the prophets.
Yeah. So there's 2 things. There's 2 things in that text that catch my attention. Number 1, I'm going to change the words just a bit. I think I'm still being fair to the text, true to the text. You can say if you think otherwise. I'm going to change the words a bit because Jesus said this is the great command. The second is like it. The way that I would change that is Jesus says, this is the most important thing. That's what the great command means. Love God with everything you possibly have. Number 2, so let's use these words. After loving God, this is the second most important thing for you. Love your neighbor as yourself. And so when Jesus talks about the most important aspect of us being right with God, love is at the top of that list. That was number 1. Number 2 is he says, Ryan, this is what brings me here. On this rests the law and the prophets. Like all of God's word up to this point is built on this principle of loving God and loving our neighbor. How much more should that be true of our brother? And then I want to share one more passage with you. We'll keep this point going. You can make your comment here, but just to kind of say the same thing in another place, look at Galatians chapter 5. Paul also mentioned this. Galatians chapter 5, and I'm going to ask that somebody reads all of verses 13 through 15. And one of the things that I want you to pay attention to is we've already been in this passage talking about family and how family acts and what family does and doesn't do. So would somebody please read Galatians 5, 13 and 15 for us?
For you are called to freedom, brothers, only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not
Yeah. Rob, your comment made me want to come here, but I wanted to do Jesus first. But yeah, I don't have to do the law of Moses. I'm free as a Christian. I'm free. I don't have to live under that. And Paul said, but you don't get to use your freedom in such a way. And the point here is, through love, serve one another. And then this thing this is the connecting idea. The whole law is fulfilled in one word. And then you say, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. That's not one word. The one word is love. That's what he's getting at here. The whole law. And it probably would not be a bad idea for us to give some extra thought to our loving one another, and not in word, but also in deed, and what it looks like practically. Other thoughts you want to say about that? That takes us on the 2 comments. Craig?
It's hard to leave out John 13:34, 5, and 6 about loving one another. The new commandment Jesus referred to.
Yeah.
That I think combines the 2 that you just talked about. And it includes everybody.
Right.
Love one another.
Yeah. One of my favorite things about that John 13, 15, 17 is, when you do this, that's how people will know that you're mine. I love that. Others on there before I push us forward a little bit? You're free. The floor's back open. Give me examples of love. We've been talking about love. I want more examples. Yeah, Ryan?
Our group in Columbia loved to sing, and there were many who were rather upset that the singing was muted with the mask wearing. But no one would ever raise a point, and didn't until the elders finally decided they weren't going to wear the mask anymore, that, for the sake of me wanting to hear the songs better, that we're going to make someone uncomfortable. And I know that that's still kind of a touchy topic today, but one of the elders there was talking to the college kids about it, and he said, compare it like this: if you're on vacation and you need to find a local congregation, are you going to go there or not go there based off of their mask wearing status? And that would be laughable. We would go and we would worship and we would assemble.
Yeah. I had a really good, there's 2 things that pop into my head about this one. I had a really good feeling today. The Assistance League down there, 2 buildings down where we park on Sunday mornings when we need overflow parking. I went down there and visited with them today about, setting up a formal agreement for parking in their stuff, and it went well. It went good. This is just side note, funny thing. I've worked with one of the ladies through my chaplain stuff, and so I called her and she said, "Yeah, come on over. Let's talk about this." And I got there, and there were 3 other ladies sitting around the table with notepads and pens, and I was like, they were doing something that I was not doing, but it went well. But in talking about the parking lot situation, I got to say that during COVID was really, I don't even like to say these words like at this point, but COVID was really good for our congregation. We really grew and thrived during that time together, which I think contributed to and led to where we are now with needing to have the parking lot conversation. And they took that. Those ladies are also religious people, and so they were both said the same thing that so many of you will have experience with. Oh, in our church, we did not. Our church did not do well during that time. And it's just, I don't know how you can look back at our congregation during that time and not see the love factor. I'm not saying it was perfect or that everything was right, but with love as a foundation, it worked. And I don't think there's any other way that could have worked without love as a foundation. Listen to this. Did anybody else want to say something? I'll do you before me. Lena, and then,
So when the first story that comes to mind, I've been thinking about this for like the past couple classes, is when I was born, my mom had an emergency C-section, and she ended up hemorrhaging and losing 3 liters of blood. And she had to be rushed back in the hospital, and it was a really scary situation. And my parents lived in Florida with no family nearby, but outside their church family. And one of the ladies who had also had a baby around the same time, like, gave us some of her breast milk to feed me while my mom was in the hospital. And another member of the church came and stayed at my parents' house just with me for 3 days. And she didn't even have another change of clothes. I mean, who else would do that?
yeah, that's what we're striving for. That's why we're spending a class talking about it. Let's do that. That's the thing. Josh, you had something over here?
Yeah, just as I'm trying to think about examples, negative examples are the ones that pop in my head. Those tend to-
That's what I do. I take everything dark. Number one.
But then I also just think about children. Like, I don't know that this is something innately in them to love the way that we're called to love. And so I was thinking about how we as parents have a duty to instill that in them. And then I got to thinking about those negative examples from brethren, and then just realizing that when we don't love like God has commanded us and needs us to love, we're being just as petty as little children.
Yeah. And interesting that that's what Jesus said. This is the kind of faith that I want you to have. And take that concept too, in so many ways. Act like the innocent children that, I don't know, that doesn't really work. Others? I got some stuff. This is why I didn't have a PowerPoint, because there's a bunch of random points floating around here. I'll try and do my 2 more. Let's see. I can't decide which one I want to do first. I'll do this one first. Example. Ray. And what Tim's doing with Ray. Is it Monday through Friday, 2 shifts, Monday through Friday? So 10 shifts every week. Have you kept track of how many weeks that is? Yeah. And I said, so here's a brother at a stage in life where he needs help, and his family is not able to do what they need to do. And so Tim is making it so that, the church family does this. And I called Tim or texted or something like that. I don't know how long ago it was, a couple weeks ago. I got really irritated. It's the 1 Timothy chapter 5 kind of irritation, where, is it 1 Timothy chapter 5 where Paul talks about widows, and he says that a family is supposed to take care of their own, and if they don't, then they're worse than an unbeliever, and what happens then is that the church family jumps in and I sent a thing over to Tim, and I said, just be done with this. This isn't your problem. This isn't the problem. This is because I was frustrated about other things that had to go. And then, was it 2 Sundays ago, when Ed made his announcement? I think it was not last Sunday, but the Sunday before that. Ed was doing announcements, and he said, thank you for this. And this is the thing that hit me. Ed said, if it weren't for us, you all, doing this, then he wouldn't be able to stay at home. And that was the thing that made me think, we do what we need to do. How would you want someone to do you in that situation? So that comment was the humbling moment that I needed to say, the love of my brother needs to drive this, not my irritation at other things. I got another one for you. You can go first if you have one. Yep, Linda?
Well, I was just thinking about that with Ray too, and the way that Bob and Stan's folks always worded that we have an opportunity. Not like, oh, come on people, we need more volunteers, like, let's get to it. But this is an opportunity for you. And I think that's how we need to view those things. Like, this is my opportunity to show love. And, the older you get, you realize in your lifetime, there's not that many opportunities. And so when something, that you see that you can do, to think about that, like, here's an opportunity for me, instead of thinking of it as sort of a burden.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I don't have to go to church. I have the chance to go worship. The opportunity mindset. So I want to read this to you so I can cross this one off my list. I've shared this with some of you before. In the year 260 AD, 200 years after Jesus was born-ish, there was a plague. If you want to search this on the internet, it's called the Alexandrian Plague. It swept like Europe all the way down to North Africa. You should see the Wikipedia article. This is nasty. Super, super bad. And there is a man named Dionysius who was an overseer in the church at Alexandria in about 260. And it's called the Plague of Cyprian. I'm talking, Dionysius was in Alexandria, but the Wikipedia article is going to be the Plague of Cyprian. And what Dionysius said was, here's what happened with Christians during that time. The most of our brethren were unsparing in their exceeding love and brotherly kindness. They held fast to each other and visited the sick fearlessly and ministered to them continually, serving them in Christ. And they died with them most joyfully, taking the affliction of others and drawing the sickness from their neighbors to themselves and willingly receiving their pains. And many who cared for the sick and gave strength to others died themselves, having transferred to themselves their death. Truly the best of our brethren departed from life in this manner, including some elders and deacons and those of the people who had the highest reputation. And they took the bodies of the saints in their open hands and in their bosoms, and closed their eyes and their mouths, and they bore them away on their shoulders and laid them out. And they clung to them and embraced them, and they prepared them suitably with washings and garments. And after a little they received like treatment themselves, for the survivors were continually following those who had gone before them. And then this is an interesting part. So there's Dionysius saying, this is how Christians behaved in the plague of Cyprian. And then he says, but with the heathen everything was quite otherwise. They deserted those who began to be sick and fled from their dearest friends. And they cast them out into the streets when they were half dead and left the dead like refuse unburied. They shunned any participation or fellowship with death. So you read a story like that and you see people who say, you are my brother. I don't understand. I don't think I can understand what's happening in this story without understanding Christian love. The love that we're supposed to have as a family and brothers with one another. Sisters, brothers and sisters. I think that's probably going to be all that we can cover. Do you have another comment that you want to make in this one? I'm going to keep it going on Sunday because there's a few things that I want to cover that I didn't get to. We're not losing anything in class. I have some extra space in the church's family class. And so on Sunday morning, we'll push this conversation forward. Probably we will not finish it on Sunday, but if we do, then we'll just go into suffering with one another, the next part of the family conversation. All right, thank you for your participation. Hey, since we're pushing it forward and you see what we're doing, come with your examples on Sunday. I don't want to just read the scripture and see the data that says love your brother. I want us to talk about what it looks like and think about the practical part of that. Thank you.